The road stretched quietly through the desert, long and empty, with heat rising from the ground like a thin veil. The man drove slowly, dust lifting behind his old truck as the late afternoon sun leaned toward the west. He had taken this road many times before. It was part of his daily routine, a path that led from his work back to the small house where he lived alone. Life for him was simple and predictable. He worked hard, spoke little, and preferred the calm of open land to the noise of towns. The desert was not a friendly place, but he respected it. He knew its moods, its silence, and its dangers. He had learned long ago that even a small mistake could cost someone dearly out here. That was why his eyes always scanned the land while he drove. A broken fence, a stranded animal, or a fallen traveler could mean trouble. As he rounded a bend near a dry riverbed, something caught his attention. At first, it looked like a dark shape against the pale sand. He slowed the truck. Squinting through the windshield, it did not move. His first thought was that it might be a dead animal. But something about the shape felt wrong. It was too small, too still. He stopped the truck and stepped out, the heat pressing against his skin. The only sound was the wind brushing against dry grass. Carefully, he walked closer, boots crunching softly on the sand. With each step, his heart beat faster. As he came near, he realized the shape was not an animal at all. It was a child. The man froze for a moment, disbelief washing over him. The child lay near the edge of the dry riverbed, curled slightly, thin arms resting against a small body. The child's clothes were dusty and worn, and the face looked pale and tired. The man knelt down slowly, careful not to startle the child. When the child lifted their head, their eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion. The man felt a tight pain in his chest. He could tell right away that the child was very weak. The lips were dry, and the breathing was shallow. The child looked hungry, thirsty, and badly lost. From the child's features and clothing, the man understood that the child was Apache. That realization brought both concern and respect. He knew the Apache people valued their families deeply, and he feared how far this child must have wandered. He spoke softly, keeping his voice calm and gentle. He did not know the child's language well, but he knew tone mattered. He slowly reached for the water bottle he always carried. He opened it and held it out, not too close, giving the child space to decide. For a moment, the child hesitated, eyes fixed on the bottle, hands shaking slightly. Then, with great effort, the child reached out and took a small sip. Relief passed through the man like a breath he did not know he was holding. He stayed where he was, allowing the child to drink slowly. After that, he offered a small piece of food from his bag. Again, the child hesitated, but hunger won over fear. The man watched quietly, his thoughts racing. How long had this child been out here? How had no one found them yet? The desert did not forgive mistakes, especially for someone so young. The man looked around, hoping to see footprints or signs of people searching nearby. There was nothing. Just endless sand, dry plants, and the fading light of day. He knew that leaving the child here was not an option. Night in the desert could be just as dangerous as the daytime heat. Still, he felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He was a stranger. Bringing the child with him could be misunderstood. Yet doing nothing would be far worse. He remembered his own childhood. Growing up poor, but never unloved. Never left alone. That memory made his decision clearer. Slowly, he stood and offered his hand. The child looked up at him, unsure. The man lowered himself again, making sure he was not towering over the child. He pointed to the truck, then back to the child, trying to show that he meant safety, not harm. After a long pause, the child placed a small hand into his. The man lifted the child carefully, surprised by how light the body felt. That worried him even more. He placed the child gently into the passenger seat of the truck, wrapping a jacket around their shoulders to protect them from the cooling air. As he started the engine, he glanced at the child, who stared quietly out the window, eyes heavy with exhaustion. As the truck moved down the road, the man's thoughts filled with questions and worry. He knew Apache land was not far, but the desert paths were confusing. The child must have wandered for hours, maybe days. He wondered about the family, about the fear they must be feeling, not knowing where their child was. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and red. The man drove carefully, keeping one hand on the wheel and one eye on the child. He spoke gently from time to time, even though he knew the child might not understand the words. He wanted the child to know they were not alone. When they reached his small house, the man parked and carried the child inside. The house was simple but clean. He laid the child down on his bed, giving them water again and a bit more food. The child ate slowly, then rested, eyes finally closing. The man sat nearby, watching quietly. He felt tired, but sleep would not come to him. His mind stayed alert, filled with concern and responsibility. He knew that this moment was important. He had found a child on the edge of survival, and whatever happened next would matter deeply. Outside, the desert grew silent under the darkening sky. Inside the small house, a quiet promise formed without words, a promise of care, patience, and hope that the right people would come soon. The man did not know it yet, but this single moment on a lonely road had already changed his life forever. Morning light entered the small house slowly, touching the walls and the worn wooden floor. The man had not slept much. He had spent most of the night sitting in a chair near the bed, listening to the child's breathing. Each soft breath brought him relief. The child was still alive, still fighting, and that alone gave him strength. When the child finally opened their eyes, the man was already awake. He smiled gently and moved closer, careful not to frighten them. The child looked around, confused at first, then their eyes settled on him. There was fear there, but also a small sense of safety. The man poured a little water into a cup and helped the child drink slowly. He then offered soft food, breaking it into small pieces. The child ate quietly, still weak, but stronger than the day before. As the morning went on, the man faced a hard truth. He could not keep the child with him for long. This was not his child, and he knew how important family and community were to the Apache people. At the same time, he did not want to make a choice that could bring trouble or fear. He sat at his small table, staring at his hands, thinking carefully. He considered driving to the nearest town, but it was far, and the roads were rough. He worried that the child was still too weak for such a long journey. He also worried that involving strangers too quickly could cause confusion. The child needed rest and care first. The desert had already taken too much from them. The man decided to wait, at least for a short time. He believed that the child's family would be searching. He knew the land well and guessed they might come this way. Until then, he would protect the child, feed them, and help them recover strength. Throughout the day, he spoke softly, using simple words and calm gestures. Even when the child did not answer, the man could see understanding growing in their eyes. Trust does not always come from language. Sometimes it comes from kindness repeated again and again. By the second day, the child could sit up without help. The man brought a small bowl of warm food and watched as the child ate more confidently. He felt a quiet joy seeing color return to the child's face. Still, worry stayed close to his heart. Every sound outside made him look toward the door. At times, fear crossed his mind. He knew there were old stories of misunderstanding between different people in the desert. He worried that when the child's family arrived, they might not believe his intentions. He reminded himself that truth and patience were his strongest tools. On the third day, the child grew curious. They walked slowly around the house, touching objects and looking out the window. The man stayed nearby, ready to help if the child became tired. When the child pointed toward the desert and spoke softly in their own language, the man understood enough. The child was thinking about home. That moment filled the man with a mix of sadness and hope. He nodded and gently placed his hand over his heart, then pointed outward, trying to say that family would come. The child watched him closely, then gave a small nod. That evening, the man stepped outside as the sun lowered again. The sky stretched wide and quiet. He scanned the land, looking for movement, for any sign of people. The desert answered only with silence. Still, he did not lose hope. That night, he lay awake once more, listening, waiting. His life before this had been simple and quiet, but now it felt full of meaning. He knew that doing the right thing was rarely easy, but it was always worth the weight it carried. As the fourth day approached, the air felt different, heavy with expectation. The man did not know what would happen next, but he was ready to face it. He had made his choice with care and compassion, and whatever came to his door, he would meet it with honesty and respect. The fourth morning arrived quietly, just like the ones before it. The desert outside the small house looked calm, but inside the man felt restless. He woke before the sun, listening to the steady breathing of the child sleeping on the bed. Over the past few days, the child had grown stronger, but the man knew this waiting could not last forever. Each passing hour made him more alert, more aware that something important was coming. He prepared a simple breakfast as he had done every day. The sound of gentle movement in the kitchen made the child wake up. This time, the child sat up on their own and looked at the man with clearer eyes. There was still quietness in the child's face, but fear had softened. Trust had taken its place. The man smiled and handed over food and water. He noticed how carefully the child ate, as if still unsure the meal would last. That small habit told him how hard the last days before they met must have been. The thought stayed with him long after the child finished eating. As the day went on, the man felt a growing sense of tension. He stepped outside often, scanning the land. He looked toward the distant hills, the dry river path, and the long road stretching into the desert. He expected to see dust rising or figures moving, but nothing appeared. Still, he knew the desert had its own rhythm. People could be closer than they seemed. Inside the house, the child moved more freely now. They followed the man from room to room, watching him closely. Sometimes the child spoke softly in their own language, pointing toward the door or the horizon. The man did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. The child missed home. The man sat on the floor so he would be at the child's level. He pointed gently to the ground and then to the child's chest, trying to show that they were safe here for now. Then he pointed outward, making a wide circle with his hand, as if to say that the world was still moving and answers would come. The child studied his face, then slowly nodded. As the sun climbed higher, the heat returned. The man closed the windows to keep the inside cool. He poured water often, careful to make sure the child drank enough. He had learned to watch closely for signs of weakness. The desert taught people to notice small changes, and he paid attention to every detail. Later in the afternoon, a distant sound caught his ear. It was faint, like wind, but different. He stepped outside and stood very still. The sound came again, carried by the air. It could have been voices, or it could have been nothing at all. His heart beat faster. He did not rush. He had learned long ago that rushing often led to mistakes. Instead, he waited, eyes steady on the horizon. The sound faded, then returned, then faded again. He could not be sure, but something inside him said the waiting was nearly over. Inside, the child sensed the change. They moved closer to the man, staying by his side. Their small hand reached for his shirt. Holding it tightly, the man placed his hand gently over the child's, offering comfort. He felt the child's fingers relax just a little. As evening approached, the lights softened, and shadows grew longer. The man prepared another meal. Though his appetite was gone, his thoughts were full of what might happen next. He hoped the child's family would understand his actions. He hoped fear would not lead to anger. Most of all, he hoped the child would soon be back where they belonged. The sun began to sink, coloring the sky with warm shades. The man stood near the door, looking outward, when he finally saw movement. 3 figures appeared in the distance, walking slowly but with purpose. They were close enough now that he could tell they were women. His chest tightened with emotion. This was the moment he had been waiting for and fearing at the same time. He did not move forward or hide. He stayed where he was, calm and open, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. The women came closer, their faces showing signs of long days under the sun. Their steps were tired but strong. They looked toward the house, then toward the man, and then they saw the child standing just behind him. In that instant, everything changed. The child stepped forward, eyes wide, and made a soft sound of recognition. The women froze for a moment, as if afraid this was not real. Then they moved quickly, their exhaustion forgotten. They reached the child and knelt down, holding them close, tears falling freely. The man stepped back, giving them space. He watched quietly as the women spoke rapidly to the child, touching their face, their hair, their hands, as if making sure they were truly there. The child held onto them tightly, no longer silent, letting emotion flow freely. The air felt heavy with feeling, but not with fear. Relief washed over the scene like a gentle wave. The man felt his own eyes burn. Though he did not fully understand why, he knew then that the waiting, the worry, and the long days had all been worth it. One of the women looked up at him. Her eyes were tired but kind. She spoke slowly, using gestures and simple words, making sure he understood. She placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head slightly. Gratitude did not need perfect language. The man nodded, returning the gesture. He spoke calmly, explaining what little he could, pointing to the road, the riverbed, and the house. The women listened closely, their expressions serious and respectful. As the sky darkened, the group stood together, connected by a shared moment that none of them would forget. The man felt a deep sense of peace. He had followed his heart, even when the path was uncertain. The desert grew quiet once more, but this time, the silence felt warm. The long wait had ended, and understanding had taken its place. The evening air felt cooler as the sun slipped behind the distant hills. The light softened, and the desert seemed to pause, as if giving space to the moment unfolding near the small house. The three women remained close to the child, their arms wrapped around them, their voices low and steady. The child leaned into them, breathing more freely now, as if a heavy weight had finally lifted. The man stood a short distance away, hands relaxed at his sides. He did not want to interrupt. He understood that this was not his moment. It belonged to the family who had searched for days with tired feet and worried hearts. Still, he stayed nearby, ready to help if needed. After a while, one of the women looked up again. She was older than the others, her face marked by long years under the sun. Her eyes held strength and care. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully, and used her hands to help explain. The man listened closely, nodding when he understood. She thanked him again, her voice steady but full of feeling. The man replied in the same calm way. He told her how he had found the child near the dry riverbed, how weak they had been, and how he had brought them home to give water and rest. He spoke without pride, without fear, simply telling the truth. He wanted them to know that everything he did came from concern, not from any other reason. The women listened with full attention. They did not interrupt. When he finished, they exchanged quiet looks with one another. The older woman placed her hand on her chest again and bowed her head slightly. The gesture was simple, but it carried deep respect. The child looked back and forth between the women and the man. Their eyes were bright now, no longer clouded by exhaustion. The child stepped forward and hugged the man around the waist. The sudden movement surprised him. He froze for a moment, then gently rested his hand on the child's shoulder. That small act seemed to touch the women deeply. One of them wiped her eyes. Another smiled softly. They spoke to the child in quiet voices, and the child nodded, still holding on for a few seconds longer before stepping back. The man felt a mix of warmth and sadness. He had grown used to the child's quiet presence over the past days. Though he knew this goodbye was the right thing, It was not an easy one. He reminded himself that real care meant knowing when to let go. The sky darkened further, and the first stars appeared. The women knew they needed to leave soon. The desert was safer to walk at night than in the heat of day. But time still mattered. They gathered their things and adjusted the cloth they carried. One of them took the child's hand firmly, ready to guide them home. Before leaving, the older woman reached into a small pouch and took out a simple item made by hand. She offered it to the man. It was not something of great value, but it held meaning. He hesitated, unsure if he should accept it. The woman gently placed it in his hand and closed his fingers around it. He understood then. This was not payment. It was a sign of respect and gratitude. He nodded and accepted it with care. They stood together for a final moment. No one spoke. Words were no longer needed. The bond formed here did not require explanation. It existed because of shared humanity, because someone had chosen kindness when it mattered most. The women and the child turned toward the open land. They walked slowly at first, then with more confidence as they moved away from the house. The child looked back once and raised a hand. The man lifted his own hand in return, holding it there until they became small shapes against the wide desert. When they were gone, the silence returned. It felt different now. It was no longer heavy with worry. It was calm, settled, almost gentle. The man stood outside for a long time, breathing in the cool air, listening to the night. Eventually, he went back inside. The house felt empty, but not lonely. He sat down at the small table and placed the gifted item in front of him. He studied it quietly, thinking about how close the child had been to losing everything, and how easily this story could have ended differently. That night, the man slept deeply for the first time in days. His dreams were calm. He did not wake to fear or doubt. Instead, he rested with the quiet knowledge that he had done what he could, when he could. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to its old rhythm. The man went back to work, drove the same roads, and lived in the same quiet way. But something inside him had changed. He noticed small things more. The way light moved across the land, the sound of wind in dry grass. The importance of being alert, not just to danger, but to opportunity. Sometimes, when he passed the dry riverbed, he slowed down. He looked at the spot where he had found the child. Each time, he felt a quiet reminder of how one moment can shift a life's direction. He did not speak about the experience often. It felt too personal, too meaningful to turn into casual talk. Yet, when he thought about it, he did not feel fear or regret. He felt gratitude. Gratitude for being in the right place at the right time. Gratitude for the trust that had been given to him, even briefly. Gratitude for the understanding shared between people who came from different paths but met at a single point of truth. The desert remained vast and unpredictable, just as it always had been. But to the man, it now carried a deeper meaning. It was not only a place of danger and survival, it was also a place where compassion could appear without warning, where lives could cross for a reason, and where simple choices could leave lasting marks. As weeks passed, the memory stayed with him, clear and steady. He knew he would carry it for the rest of his life. Not as a story of pride, but as a quiet lesson. A lesson that kindness does not need permission. And doing the right thing often begins with listening to the heart. The desert nights continued to stretch wide and silent, but somewhere out there, a child slept safely among family. And that thought was enough to bring the man peace whenever he needed it. Time moved forward, steady and quiet. Just like the desert itself. The man returned to his routine, waking early each morning, preparing his simple meals, and driving the familiar roads. From the outside, nothing in his life seemed different. The same small house stood under the wide sky. The same dust followed his truck. The same silence greeted him at the end of each day. Yet inside him, something had changed in a way that could not be seen. He often found himself thinking about the child, not with worry, but with calm hope. He imagined the child back among family, surrounded by familiar voices, warm food, and safety. He pictured laughter returning, small steps running across the land, and bedtime stories spoken in a language filled with meaning. These thoughts brought him quiet comfort. Some nights, he would sit outside and look at the stars. The desert sky was always clear, filled with countless points of light. He remembered how, on that final evening, the stars had appeared just as the women and the child walked away. Since then, the stars seemed different to him. They felt closer, as if they carried memory. The small, handmade item the woman had given him stayed on the table near his bed. He did not treat it as decoration. To him, it was a reminder. A reminder that kindness did not require planning or recognition. It only required action at the right moment. When his days felt heavy or lonely, he would look at it and feel steady again. Weeks passed, then months. One afternoon, while stopping at a nearby supply store, he noticed familiar faces in the distance. A group of Apache women stood near the entrance, speaking quietly. His heart beat faster, though he did not know why. As he stepped closer, one of them turned and looked at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then recognition appeared in her eyes. She smiled and spoke his name, her voice warm and certain. The others turned to look. Among them was the child. The child was stronger now, taller, with bright eyes and a steady stance. When they saw the man, they ran forward without hesitation. The man felt his throat tighten as the child reached him and held onto his hand. This time, there was no fear in the child's touch, only joy. The women gathered around, greeting him with respect and kindness. They spoke together, slowly and clearly, making sure he understood. They told him the child had recovered fully. The family had been whole again since that day. The child listened proudly, standing close to him. The man knelt, so he was at the child's level. He smiled and spoke softly, telling the child how strong they looked. The child nodded and laughed. A sound full of life. That sound stayed with the man long after they parted. Before leaving, the women invited him to visit their community one day. The invitation was open and sincere. The man thanked them, feeling honored. He did not promise anything, but he knew that door would always remain open in his heart. As they walked away, the man stood still, watching until they disappeared into the crowd. This goodbye felt different from the last one. It was not heavy with emotion. It was light, complete, and peaceful. That evening, as he drove home, the desert seemed brighter somehow. The land had not changed, but his view of it had. He understood now that even in the most empty places, life could connect in powerful ways. Years later, the man grew older. His hair turned gray, his steps slowed, but his mind stayed clear. When people asked about his life, he did not speak much, yet sometimes, when sitting with someone younger, he would share a quiet story about a road, a child, and a choice made without delay. He never told the story to gain praise. He told it to remind others that doing the right thing does not always come with clear answers. Sometimes, it only comes with a feeling that guides the heart. The desert continued to stretch wide and silent, just as it always had. But within that silence lived a truth the man carried with him until his final days, a truth that kindness, when given freely, never disappears. It moves forward, touching lives in ways we may never fully see. And somewhere under the same wide sky, a child who once stood on the edge of survival grew up knowing that compassion can appear when it is needed most. That knowledge became a light, passed quietly from one heart to another, lasting far beyond a single moment on a lonely road.